Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to each and every one of you for joining us today at another engaging edition of the IACC Thursday Insights. I am Parvasha from Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, West India Council, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to our today's webinar. Before we begin, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our IACC West India Council leadership. First is our president, Mr. Raghavendra Pongshe, a second generation entrepreneur and a distinguished intellectual property advisor. Next up, we have our Vice President, Mr. Tejinder Pal Singh Oberoi, Executive Director at Signet Infotech, and he holds a background in IT entrepreneurship. He is not present here with us today, but he has sent his best regards and wishes. Along with him, we have our Vice President, Mr. Manoj Balwani, a certified AI journalist and an alumni of IIM Ahmedabad, a four times entrepreneur and a seasoned management consultant. Along with us, we also have our Indo-American Chamber of Commerce West India Council committee member, Ms. Ranjana Maitra. She has been in the committee for this year. Next up, we have our esteemed speaker for today. Ms. Sutapa Banerjee. She is a business leader with over 3 decades of experience in spanning financial services, corporate governance, and behavioral science. She began her leadership career at multinational banks and was recognized amongst the top 20 global rising stars of wealth management by the Institutional Investor Group in 2007 and shortlisted for the Fortune India 50 Most Powerful Women in 2012. She serves on the board of several leading companies and Advanced Leadership Fellow at Harvard University. Ms. Banerjee has taught postgraduate students at IIM Ahmedabad as a visiting faculty. Before we begin, we encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session. We will take up these questions at the end of the session if time permits. With that, I request our regional president, Mr. Raghavendra Pongshe, to deliver his formal welcome address.
Thank you, Parva. Namaskar, good evening, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to another edition of IACC Thursday Insights, our platform for meaningful conversations, fresh ideas, and actionable business perspectives. Today's session focuses on fascinating and highly relevant subject, the psychology of organizational decision-making, cognitive biases, and design interventions. In today's business environment, decision-making is at the heart of every successful organization. While we often believe that our decisions are purely driven by data, logic, and experience, our choices are also influenced by the way we perceive information, interpret situations, and respond to our inherent cognitive biases. Understanding these behavioral patterns can help leaders and organizations make more informed, objective, and effective decisions. We are delighted to have Ms. Sutapa Banerjee, who will take us through the behavioral insights that shape key business decisions and explore how thoughtful decision interventions can help organizations improve the quality of their decision-making. On behalf of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce West India Council, I extend a warm welcome to Ms. Banerjee and to everyone joining us today. I am confident that this will be an engaging and insightful session, and I hope each of you will take away perspectives that can be applied meaningfully in your professional and organizational journeys. Thank you for joining us, and with that, I wish everyone a very enriching IACC Thursday Insights session. I now hand over the session to our moderator and my colleague, the West India Council Vice President, Mr. Manoj Balwani. Over to you, Manojji.
Thank you very much, Raghavendra ji. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to this session of the IACC Thursday Insights being hosted by the West India Council of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Parva, for that wonderful introductory session, and thank you for the kind words. It is my absolute pleasure to moderate today's session. Ladies and gentlemen, in the corporate world, we tend to believe that putting smart, highly experienced and accomplished leaders in a room automatically guarantees superior strategic choices. Yet, history and modern behavioral science tells us a very different story. From boardroom groupthink and subtle conformity pressures to cognitive biases during high stakes crises, even the brightest minds can fall into any of these severe decision traps. And to decode and explore behavioral economics, boardroom psychology, and the decision-making frameworks that shape corporate governance, we are honored to be joined today by Ms. Sutapa Banerjee. I will not spend any more time introducing her. I think Parva has done a wonderful job already. But before we get started, Sutapa, I just wanted to quickly apologize here to the audience for getting started a bit late. This never happens, but for some reason, we had some issues joining on today's Zoom link, and which is what led to this slight delay. But I would request those of you who can stay back beyond 5:30 to please stay back so that we can have a very engaging and complete session. So, Sutapa, welcome to the IACC platform, and it's a privilege to have you with us today. Without much ado, I'm going to dive straight into the conversation, and I'm going to start asking you, shooting my questions. And, this first part of my questions is going to be actually a combination of many sub-questions. And the reason I'm doing that is because as you are answering this first question of mine, I would like you to also give us a bit of a primer on this very subject. Okay, so here goes. We often assume that intelligence, expertise, and decades of experience naturally lead to superior decision making. Why do exceptionally smart individuals and accomplished leaders still fall into this critical decision trap? And when you put these highly capable leaders together in a boardroom or in a leadership team, why does collective decision making so often dilute the individual judgment rather than enhance it? Over to you, Sutapa.
Thank you so much, Manoj. And first, thank you to IACC for having me here. Apologies from my end as well for the delay. I was delayed as well in joining because of a technical problem. I don't want to take too much time because we've already lost 15 minutes in giving too much of a primer. But what I would like to say is a lot of the subject that I'm talking about is something that I strayed into. When I strayed into academia, this is the subject that I studied in my Harvard fellowship after 25 years of full-time employment. And I found that a lot of it has extremely practical tools and a way of looking at complex problems, which is both practical, not necessarily difficult to use at all, and yet lies within the silo of academia. And I have, in different ways, tried in the last 12 years that I've been studying the subject. I'm not a behavioral scientist because I'm not a primary researcher, but I have been sort of fascinated by the subject that I got the underpinnings of the subject when I was in Harvard. I taught the same subject in a full credit 20-session course at IIM Ahmedabad, the applications. And it's the applications to business that I'm going to talk about now. So let me dive straight in. And this is a nuanced subject which has many, many practical takeaways. But because it is nuanced, it's going to take time. So I'm going to restrict it to just maybe, I don't even think we have two, which is what we budgeted for. But if I stick to a 5:30, I think we'll have time for just one among several interesting tenets. But this is probably, in my mind, the most interesting one, though there are several. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about, I've actually encapsulated in a book. I'm going to actually share the book with you right now because a lot of it, if you want little bit more than the little snippet that I can give in the next 35, 40 minutes, please go ahead and look this up. It's called The Business of Business is Not Just Business, and how behavioral tools can drive real change. So it's really using a behavioral insights lens, which is exactly what I'm going to do now, to look at business decisions. So coming back to the question that Manoj framed, which is what happens to sometimes very smart people when they're taking decisions. And I'm going to just, use a lot of examples so that these subjects become as easily relatable to you as possible. I stay away from all kinds of academic jargon. If I still use one or two, catch me out and ask me questions if there's anything that you didn't follow. So I'm going to start by talking about two things. One, I'm going to give an instance of me trying to do something. So if I were to walk out of this building and I were to turn right for some errand, and if I find a whole bunch of people rushing in the opposite direction, what would I instinctively, unthinkingly, reflexively do? I would run with the herd. I would run with the crowd. I would run and do what other people like me are doing. They're all rushing in one direction. I will do the same. I will not stop to think and figure what exactly is happening on the right side. Is there a fire? Is there violence? I will not pause. I will not reflect. I will run with the crowd. And that is what is called the herding instinct. That's what's wired into our brain. In this instance, it probably saved my life or saved me from damage or injury. So this is something from evolutionary times when people were hunter-gatherers. They didn't wait to see a tiger. They either ran in the other direction or they ran for cover. And that's exactly what we continue to do even today. Another name for the herding instinct is conformity bias, or we conform, we like to do what others like us are doing. We don't like being the odd one out. So while biases naturally come with mostly negative connotations, if it's there today, it means it has been selected to be there. Otherwise, evolutionary pressure would have actually gotten it out of our system, right? So it's there for a reason. It keeps us alive. It helps us negotiate the world. But with that conformity bias, what we are now doing is what hunter-gatherers were not expected to do. We walk into boardrooms, we walk into senior leadership meeting rooms, and we take decisions on investments, on mergers and acquisitions, on making key hires, on entering new geographies, on pivoting from one business line to another. All of these decisions are taken with a brain that is wired for conformity, that is wired to do what people like us are doing, right? So that's one part which I want you to keep in mind. And the second thing which I want you to keep in mind is, let me also sort of explain. I didn't give any primers, but one thing I need to say is this discipline called behavioral insights, which is itself applications of behavioral economics. The behavioral economics discipline itself lies at the intersection of economics, psychology, group sociology, or how people behave in groups, evolutionary biology, like I just showed. And in recent times, it's been corroborated by neuroscience, which is because brain imaging techniques have become easier. So it's very easy through fMRI, etc., to observe the brain. So it's been corroborated by neuroscience in the last couple of decades. Otherwise, it's a subject which has been built over decades and decades, going up to maybe 8, 9 decades of just empirical evidence, which means it's research-based, it's evidence-based. So none of this are leaps of faith by any person. And a lot of the techniques that I will be talked about are techniques for a subject where people have won Nobel Prizes, not one, but 2 or 3, but multiple, right? What I have done is contextualize them to the Indian scenario and to business realities internationally as well as in India. And I've done that even there. There is a lot of other people also doing it, but it's still largely within academia. And my attempt here in the book, in the work I do, is to mainstream it as much as possible. So a lot of this empirical evidence which I spoke about actually says that when you have on any complex problem, if you were to take a decision, that decision becomes optimum and the process of decision making becomes far more robust if you have a diversity of views. In other words, like-minded people, if they were to try to solve a problem, they would use the same assumptions, the same lens for looking at the problem, and would probably come to the same set of obstacles and not have a way out of it. But if you have a set of diverse views, and by diverse views, it also means coming from a diverse set of people, because these views have to reflect different realities. So it has to reflect a different way of thinking, using different lenses, having different perspectives, having models. Your mental models have to be different. And only then would you look at the same problem using differing lenses. And that is what makes the process of decision or key decisions become that much more robust when you use that process. And as I said, this is based on longitudinal and geographical research. So it's not like tested on a few lab rats, as we call them. This has been over years tested again and again, and it's been found that a diverse set of people who think differently are able to offer solutions, because their assumptions and how they look at the problem is different. They're able to come up with way better solutions than like-minded people, right? So that's on diversity. Now, diversity, the way I just now talked about it, is different from identity diversity, which is gender diversity. However, it's an important component of it, right? So all of your identity diversities, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's gender, whether you're able or disabled, all of it, or physically challenged, all of it adds to one item called identity diversity, which feeds into what I called cognitive diversity, or the ability to think differently. But cognitive diversity also has other elements, which means that basically, if I come from a completely different occupation, if I'm a journalist, if I'm an academic, if I'm a marketing person, if I'm a brand person, if I come from financial services, all of them over years has enabled me to look at problems in a certain way. Only if I have a set of people who come from these different occupations, alongside identity diversity, also different geographic areas, do you bring in true diversity, right? So that's essentially the meaning of cognitive diversity. I also want to give two examples to highlight why this is that important before I come to how you can make cognitive diversity thrive. So one of them is, I'm trying to actually look and see a couple of data points which I could share with you. So let's take an example of, say, a transition of automotive company which uses traditional gasoline to EV companies. Now, you can't, if you had only mechanical engineers, they would only look at efficiency and horsepower, right? But what you need is urban planners. You need data scientists. You need behavioral economists. Only then would you be able to look at it from all angles and do the right kind of price incentives, behavioral nudges, which also encourages adoptability by consumers, right? So that's one example to show you why a cognitively diverse set of people coming together on any complex problem is better. I'll give one more example before I move on to something else, and which is, let's take a corporate turnaround situation where your market, the corporate's market, has actually gotten disrupted by a newcomer, right? Now, if you have a whole set of legacy people who may have been very successful in the past, may have actually built the business, coming together to think of solutions, chances are and that's the way the brain functions, the default filter is always going to be what has worked for you in the past, right? And in a situation which is completely different, where you have actually been disrupted, what you essentially need are not, you may need some of the legacy people, but you also need tech entrepreneurs. You also need consumer insights specialists to be able to jointly break the deadlock and actually pivot to a situation where you can be alive and thriving again, right? So those are just examples of why cognitive diversity is important in a situation where our brains are typically wired to conform and do what others like us have done. And our individual brains are like to conform to past patterns of behavior, particularly what has worked for us in the past. And if you imagine very successful people, what has brought them success in the past will always be the default filter going forward, right? So that's why the importance of a cognitively diverse set of people. Now, the second question that comes is, I just mentioned that while it's extremely important to have cognitively diverse people because that's the set of views that you need to be expressed to come to a more optimum decision. I also gave you an example which showed that, when I came outside to turn right and I saw everybody turning in the other direction, I reflexively, and I chose my words very carefully. I unthinkingly, reflexively, immediately ran in the opposite direction with the other. That's how strong our conformity bias is. I'm going to give you one more example because to me, at the end of this session, if you go away with just one knowledge of how we conform and how deep conformity bias is, and a couple of techniques how to overcome it with the kind of time that we have, I would be happy with that. So let me give you another example. Now, this is an example which in the world of psychology has been done many, many times. It's called the Ashline experiment. And the experiment is simple. The experiment is basically, it's lines. So you have a card, and you have 3 lines. And the lines the heights are ostensibly different. So it's very clear visually that they're different heights. One could be 1 feet, one could be 2 feet, one could be 3 feet, or let's say one is 6 inches, 1.5, 3.5, so that it's as different as it gets. Those were the kinds of heights chosen. And you have one card, which is say 1.5 feet. So it corresponds to the middle line, right? Now, in the experiment, it's either done with 5 people or 8 people. And it has been done extensively, longitudinally, over time, in different settings. And what happens is 5, if it's a group of, say, 8, 7 are stooges of the experimenter. That means they are the experimenter's person and they've been told what answer to give. And the last person is an actual person who does not know and is actually the true person on whom this is being experimented. So in the Ashline experiment, the first 7 people are told to give the wrong answer. So even though the line very clearly corresponds to the line in the center, all of these people say it's the first line. Okay, so they're saying 1.5 feet line is 6 inches long, right? Guess what happens to the 8th person? In 75, and I'm looking at the actual data so that I don't go wrong, in 75% of cases, the last person gives the wrong answer. The person disbelieves her own eyes and actually says what others have said. That's how strong conformity bias is. And this is a completely unknown set of people, right? These are people that you don't know, 7 people. It's just that 7 people saying something and suddenly you start to disbelieve your own eyes. You tend to believe, and in neuroscience has been observed actually how the doubt happens and how you change your mind, right? Now imagine when you come into either a senior leadership team meeting or in a boardroom where you're meeting the same set of people again and again. You may socially know them. You have, you need to work with them. And some are socially more dominant. Some are organizationally, hierarchically superior. And you are expected to give your independent view, objective view in that scenario where you have very charismatic leaders. If it's a board situation, you have the chair of the board who's obviously there for a reason because that person commands that respect and credibility. And you are supposed to give your independent view. And I stress the word when it comes to diverse views, it is your own view, your own independent view. And independent is a word, again, which is very loosely used. In the behavioral sciences field, when we use the word independent, what we mean is my view should be, if it's to be independent, my view should be uncorrelated to Manoj's view or to Ranjana's view or to Parva's view, right? In other words, we may end up agreeing, but I need to give a view which may have zero correlation or not be influenced by any of their views, right? And I've given you more than one example to show how deeply conformity bias is wired in us. So shouting from the rooftops and saying, yes, we are an open-minded organization, please give your own objective view, you must give your own view, is easy to say, but does not help. So what then can you do to encourage or to create? So what we say is, if you can't rewire the brain, or it's very, very difficult and time consuming to change the wiring in the brain, what is much easier to do is interventions which are in the environment. So you design your environment differently. That's why, the whole topic is cognitive biases. So conformity bias is a cognitive bias, which is wired into your brain. And what I'm bringing to the fore is an intervention where I'm redesigning the environment. And this redesign can take many forms and shapes, right? I'm going to give you one example here, which hopefully people can use. And this is to be used for key decisions, for consequential decisions. By consequential, I mean decisions which involve a large sum of money, involve a business decision where you're pivoting from one thing to another. So not small incremental decisions, but large-sized, outsized decisions which may not be easily reversible, a merger or an acquisition, hiring a CEO, pivoting into a new business line, going into a completely new geography, getting into an international market from being a domestic player. All of these are large decisions. So this particular technique is called a premortem, and it comes from the word postmortem, which is basically, you do a postmortem when a patient has died, right? What we are talking about is premortem, which means, and the example that I usually take is either hiring a CEO of a company or say a merger or an acquisition. So let's for the time being assume that we've done an acquisition. Now, what happens is typically when either into a boardroom or in a senior leadership meeting, the promoter, founder, or the CEO comes in wanting to do an acquisition, the body language is crystal clear that the person in all likelihood has come to talk about it because they want to go ahead with it, right? And everything is clear from looking at the person, right? You may have a dossier with pros and cons in front of you, but it's very clear from the body language which direction or what decision is required of you, right? Now, in that situation, keeping in mind the hierarchy of the person who's making this, if you have a few people in the boardroom or in the senior leadership room, chances are most of them, one person may say, yes, but we should also consider this. But chances are it's already, even if you had views to the contrary, it has been toned down, right? And toned down significantly, right? And so hence the whole idea is that even the person who's brought it to the table would probably benefit from hearing all points of views, but by nature of, his body language, it is already crystal clear that the person seems to have thought about it enough and is wanting to go ahead with it. So, whoever had a dissenting view has already toned it down, and the others will probably be yes people to the question in front. Now, what then? So the interesting thing there is there a way that you can create, and also, keeping in mind conformity bias, is there a way that an environment can be created which makes possible and makes permissible dissent? And that is where premortem comes in. Premortem essentially means that it actually gives the founder, or whoever has come with the actual transaction. In this instance, it's a transaction. It could well be any other context, any large decision of any kind. I'm just sticking to this example. Actually comes and states that, let's assume we've gone ahead with the acquisition. And let's assume after 2 years, let's assume now that after 2 years, the decision has actually failed. It didn't work out. I am asking the senior leadership team today, or the boardroom today, to look at that same data, the same dossier with pros and cons, no change, the same data which made you agree to it. I want you to now look at that same data and tell me why it could go. Okay, so the data remains the same. You're looking at the same data and trying to now say, what could go wrong? So what you're making everybody do is think the opposite. People who anyways agreed are now moving away from that filter to think, look at the data all over again and pick holes in their own argument to find out why it can go wrong. People who dissented now have a legitimate reason to come out and say what they wanted to say, right? So what you're doing is very, very interesting. You're legitimizing dissent. So when we say independent directors in a boardroom have to give their independent view, it's easier said than done. When you go to a senior leadership team meeting and say, please, everybody, I want each of you to give your own views, it doesn't happen. This is a technique, and there are many such tools and techniques, which ensures that you give that view without. Why do you stay away from giving your own view? Because you're scared of disagreement. You're scared that your own position may get undermined by disagreeing with the boss, right? Here, the boss is legitimizing dissent. That's the difference, right? Now, what happens in actual situations? As I said, this whole study, this whole discipline is based on empirical evidence, right? What happens when a situation like this actually happens? Empirically, it has been found in many mergers and acquisitions, when you use this, and one of the people, and I will mention his name, and I mention his name in my book as well, is Daniel Kahneman. And Daniel Kahneman actually said that in most of the situations, people still go ahead with it. So then you can say, so what was the point of doing all of this? The point is extremely important. When you know that this, and this can go wrong, what you do is you immediately build guardrails. You immediately imagine a scenario A where this could go wrong in the acquisition, and you have a plan already made. This could go wrong if I hire this man as the chief executive and I have a plan B ready. So you're not taken aback. Those don't come as surprises. You go in with your eyes and ears open. You know there could be resistance from change from these quarters. So you go in with a plan of how you want to lower that resistance. So your plans are ready. So what it does is the most important thing. You go in with a decision, but you know, finally, all decisions are probabilistic. And that's the biggest thing about behavioral economics is and the human brain is not geared to a probabilistic or a statistical way of thinking. Probabilistic means for anything, you're going in for that decision because you think 65, 70% chances are that I'm going to be right. There is this clear 30, 35% that you could be wrong or even more, right? This is what helps you prepare for that. You prepare plan A, plan B, plan C to actually guard against this. And imagine if this is the kind of thinking that there was during COVID, during geopolitics, how differently you would actually shape your business strategy. Would you always think of the lowest cost, most efficient way of doing things, or would you actually have redundancies, right? You would, which in other words means, would you actually have concentration of supply lines only on one side, or would you have more than one? Because that's a risk mitigant, even if it sometimes means expending a little extra cost, because there will be trade-offs, right? So that's the whole scenario of where it comes to pre-mortem. It actually, even if you go ahead with the decision, you go with your eyes open, you go with plan A, plan B, plan C. How much time do we have, Manoj? Are we good on time?
Yeah, it's 5:23, which means we officially have only 7 minutes as per the original 1 hour slot. But as I said to the audience, right, I think most of them will stay back at least for 10 minutes. So yeah, I think if we can wrap up in another few minutes, and then maybe Parva, do we have any questions in the Q&A box?
So we do have one question, yes.
So
Right.
you want
Okay,
me
we have one
to
question.
complete this subject? That's what I thought. I think I'm not going to be able to do the other fascinating subject, which is on luck versus skill and how we keep mistaking luck for skill. But before we go into I want to wrap this up with just one more thing, and then we can take the question. So I spoke about groupthink at length, right? Conformity bias is another word for groupthink, which you referred to, Manoj. What I did not speak about was about individually. This is in a group, right? And I also used an intervention which works in a group, right? Because if everybody is doing this, then how do you legitimize dissent within the whole group? What about individually, right? And that's a question people have asked me even in my book events, because I keep talking about this as one of the most important biases, as well as in other sessions, and I do workshops as well in this area. And individually, I can only think it's actually easier to intervene in a group situation because group psychology offers you more tools. In an individual situation, there is only one thing we can do, and which is when you have data in front of you or a dossier in front of you, do not get swayed by what I call halo, or what's in this subject called the halo effect. It does not matter if the person who's saying something is the most charismatic leader who you see in newspapers all the time, who's cutting ribbons, opening sessions all the time. It does not matter. You need to do what you need to take your decision completely in a structured manner, not in your mind, because the mind is we say it's a matter of judgment, right? Another way of how I call my sessions is errors in judgment. When you use the mind as the measuring rod, there are way too many approximations and way too much noise which influences that. So the way to do it is to pause, reflect, and take what is called not reflexive, quick, fast, which is the herding instinct, right? As I said, immediate, quick, unthinking. Get away from that in a leadership room or in a boardroom to pause instead of reflexive, reflecting. Pause, reflect, write down pros and cons. Do not take the first decision that enters your head. Daniel Kahneman uses the term delayed intuition, which means look at the data carefully. In a boardroom, ask for more data. In a senior leadership room, ask for more data if necessary, right? Cross-validate data from independent sources. Hear all of the people. So if you're the chair or if you're the senior leader in the team, take individual views rather than in a group. Come back to the group after you've taken individual views, right? And even for individuals, if you're sort of trying to decide, write the pros and cons, give weightages to the pros and cons, and multiply those weightages and try to arrive at the decision. And we're all talking consequential decisions. You would do it only if it's consequential, right? And then try to arrive at what it gives you, not what intuitively comes to your mind. What intuitively comes to your mind is what you wish to do. What is gut? Gut is nothing but your default filter. And that default filter may have worked well and in a certain circumstance, but the current circumstances could be completely different and is unlikely to work. In most situations, the current situation is never an identical replay of the past, right? So you need to pause, you need to reflect, and then take that same view that you were trying to take, or rather take a view that you now come to, which is called delayed intuition, which means you're refusing to take a call based on gut. You're doing a more informed decision, even if you're doing it alone, individually, later, after cross-validating, taking points of views of different people in different ways, looking at different kinds of data, and then coming to it. So I'll stop there. That's the piece that I wanted to cover on only one section, which is conformity bias. Take questions, if any, and then we can figure if we have any time. I doubt if we do.
Yeah. So what we'll do, right, just in the interest of completeness, we'll take the question, and then maybe those who have not budgeted for enough time can log off, right? But I would request you, Sutapa, if you have some additional time, right, we should ideally go through that skill versus luck topic in the interest of completeness, because obviously we won't be able to do this kind of a program soon enough, right? So we'll finish with the Q&A, and then we'll touch upon that skill versus luck subject. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's okay, except I have a hard stop at about 10 to 6. So we will need to, because I have a meeting, which in any case I delayed to about 5:45. Maybe I can, go in 5 minutes later, but that's actually a board committee.
Yeah. No, what we'll do is we'll wrap up at sharp 5:45, and which means that we, between the two of us, we'll have to wrap up at 5:40, because that 5 minute we need for the vote of thanks, etc.
Exactly. So let's take the questions and see if it gives us time.
Yeah, we'll take the question right now. Okay, so let me see here. Yeah, there is one question here which says, while as much as diverse and independent views, I'll just read it directly
Yeah, okay.
from the screen, right?
Mhm.
While as much as diverse and independent views have proven to have successful results for business, is it still not welcomed?
Mhm.
Okay, and it goes on to say senior management takes it as a disrespect and as a challenging question raised, put them down. And the challenge is even more when the diverse opinion is from a woman, despite the proving enough of her credibility and her expertise. How do we navigate this situation?
I think that's what I answered pretty much, right? The fact that, it's not just women, certainly women, junior employees, or somebody who's relatively new to that organization, somebody who is part of the senior management team or part of the boardroom but has just come in. It could be a woman, it could be a newcomer, it could be somebody who's yet to establish credibility within that new setup, right? And all of them will feel, and it's not just them, even the others, all have not just conformity bias wired in, but also a fear of reprisal, right? That if I were to disagree, what would my position would be undermined? There's this whole concept called psychological safety, and I will give one quick example. Probably it's a very interesting example, and this goes back all the way to 1977. I think this is the air crash, the Tenerife Pan Am air crash at the Tenerife airport in the US. Which happened, there was a junior pilot. I've forgotten the names. Even the names are sort of, you can Google it. There was a very famous pilot who was actually piloting it. And there was a junior pilot trying to actually point out something which was malfunctioning. I forget the exact details of the case. And he was actually almost sort of said that, look, I know what I need to do. And after that, and the plane actually crashed. A lot of people lost their lives. I don't know the exact number, but it's excess of, I think, 200 or 400 or 500 people lost their lives. But it led to, after that, a very interesting thing in the aviation world. It's called CRM. So it's basically, how do you have, it's crew management. How do you ensure your crew are, this whole concept of legitimizing dissent? How does the crew, whether it's junior or senior, and particularly in this instance, obviously the junior people, have the ability to actually insist that they be heard? If they are saying something is not functioning, nobody can browbeat anybody, right? Now, that has become part of aviation protocol today, right? So they have to, that psychological safe environment, psychological safety, by the way, is a Harvard professor called Amy Edmondson. There's a lot of research that she's done in that area, and there are many ways in which you can do it. But in the aviation sector, where you need to be zero defect, this is now protocol, right? And to me, these are some of the things which you need to adopt everywhere, right? If you want a situation where you need to take the most robust decision, the best decision, so which should be in pretty much all businesses, all senior leadership rooms. And I spoke about, in any case, pre-mortem, thinking the opposite, perspective taking, everybody's perspectives to be taken. So those are all ways and means of creating an environment which is safe, so that people don't feel threatened to give their point of view, right? It also means that the most senior person, the boss, actually takes opinions, all of which I'm just repeating, have taken beforehand, right? So individual views have been taken. The person who is the most senior talks last, because whatever the most senior person says, will have a little bit of an echo chamber. So you speak last. Ask the junior most person to speak first, right? That's how you ensure that all views are heard and people are speaking without fear of reprisal, because they don't know what the fear, what the right answer is, and you don't already come with a pre-decided answer, which is what happens. I took M&As typically because it's very crystal clear what the body language is, and that's where you use techniques like pre-mortem.
Yeah. So as you were speaking, I was just going through the additional questions. Actually, most of these questions have already been answered. So what I will do is I am going to kind of request you to quickly touch upon that skill versus luck subject.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So very quickly, if we look at, and it's something, which people who actually sort of liaise with me on email have seen, I've actually got something which goes below my signature, which says, good decisions can lead to bad outcomes. Bad decisions can lead to good outcomes, right? And I do it just, for fun and to see whether it intrigues people. And I see quite a few people who actually come back to me. Many people don't. Sometimes I have the time to give an answer, but here I actually have the time since you're asking me, so I will explain that. So very simply, what comes into the outcome and why the outcome may not always reflect a good decision is because of extraneous factors, right? Because of what I call luck, right? And there is a Nobel Prize winner, I think 2015 or 16, Holstrom, who gives a very simple example in his actual economics Nobel Prize winning speech. He says it's as simple as, an oil, the CEO of an oil company getting rewarded when oil prices are high because he's made great revenues. Right. So, and yet, all across, not internationally, some of them have changed. India, certainly the financial services world where I come from, even today works with outcome. And outcome is basically sales, revenue, profits, right? Irrespective of what market conditions are. And we reward people based on that, right? And what that points out to is the fact that sometimes you're rewarding people for just luck, right? Because anything where luck plays an outsized role will not persist over time. And for persisting over time, you need to see it the first year, the second year, the third year, and in some macro instances, even longer, right? And let me actually see if I can read out two data points to you. Which I have to actually read out because I'm using here my workshop text or my books to actually figure it. Yeah.
Sure.
So let me read this out. So this is an old one. The top 10 ranked mutual funds out of 283 in the US between 90 and 94 had moved in the next 5 years to a mean rank of 142 from the top 10. Okay. The famous book, Peters and Waterman, they profile these 43 high-performing companies in their best-selling book, In Search of Excellence, in the early 1980s. All the performance levels became mediocre in the next 5 years, okay? And Daniel Kahneman himself, in multiple researches, has said that skilled analysts are hopeless at predicting the prices of shares, and star fund managers seldom add value to a client portfolio consistently over time. And I've been in money management out of, 13 out of my 24 years, I was heading money management myself. So I know how true this is. In our financial services world, we have a line which says, don't confuse brains and a bull market. Right? You can't get clearer than that. So that's what happens with too much outcome focus. So if outcome is a large part of outcome is outside your hands, what then should you actually focus on? Right? And what we actually talk about, and there are companies which do it, and including some Indian companies, some I've been associated with, is the drivers of that outcome, which means what is controllable in your hands, which will not be shaped by external forces, but which drive the outcomes, right? I will also add here, but I don't think we'll have time to go into it, that while I'm a strong believer that the drivers of outcome or the processes that drive outcomes need to have a significant weightage in your KPI, I don't think you should give up on outcome at all. And that's an interesting thing that I have done work on myself. But I'll come to that later. But what could some of these be? It could be market share, it could be productivity, it could be client engagement. All of these things are drivers to success, right? Drivers to that outcome, but they are not shaped by external factors. There is also something called by outcome. It also sometimes leads to what's called an outcome mindset, vis-a-vis what we call a systems mindset, right? Now, and I'll give a very clear, simple example and give that example and then stop, which is if, say, if you were to say you launched a product which you expected to really do well, and it didn't do well, and you say, the product didn't do well because it didn't match up to competition. That's, to me, an outcome mindset response. On the other hand, if you actually looked at it and said, Okay, the product didn't do well. How did we take that decision? What's the data we looked at when we took that decision? Who were the people involved when we took that decision? How much time did we spend on it? What are the data points that we actually look at? Who did we consult? What were the incentive structures of people who went out and were involved in the product team, right? That's a systems mindset where you're dissecting.
Correct.
Yeah, before you go into it. So whether it's good or bad, the decision process needs to be put under a microscope. You need to map the decision process, and you need to, in today's environment, have it digitally available, which also means your ability to put yourself on the line, if you're a very senior leader, to actually have the light shown on you, because you could be wrong, and having the humility to say that I'm right. So I'll stop there. It's a very very detailed subject and has lots to offer, but I'll just stop there in the interest of time.
Yes. Thank you. What a fascinating and thought-provoking masterclass, Sutapa. No wonder you are on so many boards of so many eminent companies, right? It's amazing. I mean, the body language, the spiritedness with which you speak, I think you eat, drink, and breathe, and everything in your veins is all about corporate governance. Yeah. So this is really wonderful, and without taking any more time, what I'll do is I'll quickly pass it on to our colleague Ranjana to read out the vote of thanks. And with that, and I'll also request those of you who have incremental questions, please email them over to us. We will share them with Sutapa and we'll try to get them answered. Yeah. Over to you, Ranjana.
Thank you so much. Let me say my thank you first, Ranjana, before you do. Thanks very much. Yeah. And I'm sort of, I feel a little bad that people have lost out on those 15 minutes, but hopefully the 40 minutes that we were able to come together and speak has been worth their while. Thank you.
Oh yeah. And I must say that, all the questions that I had on my list were by default answered. So
thank you so much.
I couldn't have asked for a better anchor for this, and as a moderator, I think this was a dream session for me, because before I could even ask the questions, I got all the answers. Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for having me. Sorry, Ranjana, all yours.
Thank you, Sutapa. Thank you, Manoj, for moderating this session. Thank you, Mr. Pongse and Parva and everyone else. I will, deviate a little, Sutapa, because I know you and your passion was so eminent that, I think it was a very, very interesting session, and it has been recorded, and a lot of people who couldn't join in, we are going to send out the recording to them as well, because they should not lose out on what you spoke about. And it's an irony, Sutapa, and I think it's good that today it's raining very heavily in Mumbai, and the day your book was launched, also it was raining very heavily in Mumbai. So that I'll say, on behalf of IACC, Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, I extend a heartfelt gratitude to you, Sutapa, on sharing your valuable insights on the psychology of organization, decision-making, cognitive biases, and design interventions. In this 40-45 minutes, what you told us, it has been amazing, but I think we need a complete half-day session with you to be able to really get into the depth of it. Teeny bit, not like, you are so well versed with everything.
Exactly that. It's 4 hours of workshop. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anything below that, this is also a subject which I deeply is very close to my heart. So it was amazing. So your engaging perspectives, everything was, on cognitive biases. That's a very, very, much not talked about much, right? And it is there in every one of us. And the psychology behind the decisions have offered us a deeper understanding of how our minds influence organizational choices. And we do it all the time, whether it's in organizations, whether it's home, whether it's in the money markets, we all take these biases are there.
Now you know the reason for my passion. So I've built it work, and now if with the wisdom of the last 12 years, if I were to run those businesses again, I have no qualms in saying I would discard close to over 50-60% of what I did. Because what I did intuitively without really knowing what should be done. What worked for me is what I continue to do, which is what most people do. So hence the passion.
Absolutely. And I thank our ICC WIC Secretariat as well, Vishnu and Parva, for doing this. And we hope that this has encouraged all of us to pause, reflect, and look more closely. And biases is something, in organizations, as you know, Sutapa, it's said all the time. People talk about biases, but nobody wants to accept that they are biases, right? It's very difficult to accept that you have a bias towards a certain thing. They'll say, no, we are very objective. That's the thing that we all use all the time. We try to say it's objective, but it's not objective. We all have inherent biases, and how do we overcome that? And thank you very much, Sutapa, once again, and look forward to meeting you soon and taking this forward in other ways, in other forums as well. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank you.
great day. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.